Deputy Ivana Bacik.
And Minister, I also want to raise the outrageous delays in Dublin Airport over the weekend, and clearly these have had a devastating effect for so many people. We know 1,000 people have missed their flights, we know people missed out on job opportunities, on work-related travel, on funerals, on weddings, on holidays and so much more. And clearly this is a huge issue of consumer rights, it's a huge issue for those passengers who were so seriously inconvenienced over the weekend, Minister. But it's not just a matter of poor planning by the DAA, although that's clearly a serious issue in itself. It also points to two broader issues for which government must take responsibility, and that is a failure of our national aviation policy, a failure to ensure effective distribution of flights among our airports, because it's not just about Dublin Airport. We're conscious that many people are now looking to other airports, looking at Cork Airport, looking at Farranfore Airport, and looking at airports where there is capacity, and seeing the contrast between the chaos we saw at the weekend with Dublin Airport. So it's about a national aviation policy that must take into account distribution of workload among our regional airports too. And it's also, at a broader level, Minister, about workers' rights, and that's something that our transport spokesperson Duncan Smith has been raising consistently now for some time. We've seen the Dublin Airport Authority lay off staff during COVID, we saw significant numbers laid off, and we saw government failing to put in a no redundancy clause as a condition of the state supports that were being granted. And we know the DAA took advantage of those state supports like the EWSS, which is coming to an end today, and yet there was no conditionality around workers' rights in that. We heard this morning, Minister, from an anonymous worker at Dublin Airport about the serious issues around workplace conditions and around pay that pertain for the many staff at Dublin Airport, many of whom took the brunt of understandable passenger frustration at the weekend, and so many of whom are in such a low-paid sector. The real concern we have is that we've seen Dublin Airport become a low-cost airport as the preponderance of low-cost airlines has dominated, and we've seen a race to the bottom as a result. And Minister, what I'm asking is, can you assure passengers, first of all, that we won't see the same chaotic scenes at the airport this weekend, but can you also assure the House that there will be a proper and effective national aviation strategy put in place to ensure that this imbalance between one airport and our other airports doesn't occur again? And will you also take steps to ensure that the serious staffing issues, the low-paid conditions for so many staff at Dublin Airport are addressed, and that indeed we see better conditions for staff and genuine commitment to move to a living wage, as we saw in our Labour bill on a living wage? And we welcomed last week the Taoiseach's announcement that the government would be introducing living wage legislation, but we're conscious that Ireland has a serious problem with low pay, with 1 in 5 of our workforce low paid. It's not just about Dublin Airport, but clearly that was a huge factor in the staffing shortfall that led to such chaotic scenes for so many at the weekend.
Thank you. Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy Bacik. The decision of the DAA back in, I believe it was May of 2020, to embark on a voluntary severance scheme was at the time against the backdrop of a collapse in the aviation industry and the commercial reality that they were losing an enormous amount of money on a day-to-day basis. And they proposed a voluntary severance scheme at the time, and there was a significant uptake in relation to that voluntary severance scheme. I think it is also fair to say that the recovery in aviation has exceeded the expectations of the majority of commentators, and I think it has exceeded the DAA's own expectations, to be frank. And I think that is why they simply, in recent weeks, as manifested and as crystallised at the weekend in such a terrible way, did not have the level of staffing resources that they actually needed. It's a good thing that aviation has recovered much more quickly than was forecast, but it is important that we uphold, and the DAA uphold to the highest possible standards, the integrity of the security arrangements at the airport, because their first priority is to ensure the safety of the passengers who are going through the airport, and indeed those who work at the airport as well. There has been significant interest in the recruitment campaign. I hear what you say in relation to terms and conditions, but more than 5,000 applications since the beginning of March does indicate to me a high level of interest in relation to the security roles that are there. And it's important to say that the terms and conditions of of employment are agreed or negotiated on a collective basis between the DAA and indeed the trade unions representing the staff who are there. In relation to the wider aviation policy of government, we have a policy that supports the regions. We have a regional airports programme. Just last month, Minister Naughton, for example, announced capital funding, not just for the airports that traditionally avail of the regional airports programme and indeed avail of PSOs, Donegal, Kerry, Ireland West, Knock Airport, but also included for the first time the state regional airports in the form of Cork and Shannon in the regional airports programme, and both of them benefited from capital funding, which I think was the correct decision, and that is by virtue of the size and the passenger numbers at those airports. They're now eligible for funding under the programme, and it is anticipated that there will be a round of operational grant aid also under the regional airports programme. Almost 22 million in operation support is available during this year to support measures such as air traffic control, fire services and security related operations at airports, and there will be invitations to apply for that operational aid, and it will issue to eligible airports towards the latter half of the year. So the government strategy is to support regional airports, including the state regional airports, who all provide an excellent quality of service and provide competition for Dublin Airport, which is needed too.
Well, I thank you, Minister, for your response on the aviation strategy as it relates to airports like Shannon and Cork and Farranfore. And I also hear what you say about the recovery of aviation. But this wasn't unpredictable. Airlines sold flights. It was utterly predictable how many people would be flying out of Dublin Airport at the weekend just gone. So there was clearly a serious problem, a serious failure of workforce planning. In terms of the issue around staff conditions and pay, the trade unions at Dublin Airport have been raising this for some time. There is a serious issue again about retention of staff, and that is related to the pay levels and to the conditions that pertain and that apply to staff at the airport. And that has to be addressed to ensure that we don't see these shortfalls on an ongoing basis. And I repeat again, Minister, our concern about Dublin Airport becoming effectively a low-cost airport at a time when we're seeing inflation rising at above 8% today, and we're seeing cost of living crisis really biting into so many people's pockets, into so many people's incomes, which is why we in Labour have been saying Ireland needs a pay rise, and why we have been pushing for enactment of a bill that would transform the minimum wage into a living wage. And we're calling on government to adopt the bill, to adopt the principle in our bill that would bring about a much quicker transformation and a much speedier increase in the actual incomes that people earn, and would address some of the issues around low pay that we saw affecting staff numbers in Dublin Airport and in so many other places around the country.
Thank you, Deputy. So the DA has major obligations as an employer. They now have a duty to ensure that they reach a full staffing complement to ensure the safe and efficient running of Dublin Airport and indeed Cork Airport, which comes under the DA as well. And that is why they are in the process of a very significant recruitment campaign which has attracted a lot of interest. As I said, they have offered existing security staff contracts with a minimum of 30 hours. They require staff to be available to work 40 hours across a 24/7 roster, with employees notified 30 days in advance of their next 4-week schedule. And in reality, most staff work more than the guaranteed minimum hours, and overtime is available. Permanent security staff are employed on a pensionable and secure basis, and all of the DA arrangements are, as I said, collectively bargained for. And to your wider point in relation to pay, as you know, there are negotiations currently underway in respect of public pay in Ireland, and that will impact on about 365,000 public servants across the country. And I do hope that we can reach a successful conclusion in the next short number of weeks in relation to that matter. It's important from a public expenditure point of view, it's important from an industrial relations point of view, but it is absolutely important for those thousands of workers as well who provide essential services to us all.
Thank you very much.